important to know about the history of Catholic education, and the reality is we do stand on the shoulders of those religious who came before us.
I mean, I think of legacy as a gift, something that's passed on to future generations, and there would be no Catholic education in Ontario, I don't think, unless it had been for the religious orders.
C'est surtout une question d'être nous-mêmes et d'en être fiers et heureux. De pouvoir avoir notre éducation dans notre propre langue, selon nos propres croyances et notre propre culture, comme peuple fondateur du Canada, nous paraît juste et bon.
At a time when the system was facing near crisis, with a lack of teachers, a lack of resources in the 1850s, it was the infusion of the intelligence, the bodies, the servants that were provided by the religious orders that essentially saved the system in the middle of the 19th century.
I had good students. They were great kids, and we all, we knew that we didn't have a lot of what other schools might have had, but we got the work done by working. I even had time to go out and play ball with them at recess. We worked together. I think that's the big thing. We worked together.
The hope is that there are going to be sufficient numbers of Catholic educators who own their vocation, who approach it with such great joy and hope that they will sustain this great project, the gift that the Catholic school is to the province of Ontario. That's the hope.
Les écoles catholiques de l'Ontario ont un passé coloré, parfois marqué de violences sectaires et d'échanges haineux entre les protestants et catholiques. Ces échanges ont aussi parfois éclaté en émeutes à travers les communautés du Haut-Canada. Pendant cette période de conflit, le révérend Edgerton Ryerson, surintendant de l'éducation dans le Haut-Canada, plaidait pour un système scolaire non sectaire et commun. Un tel système servirait à promouvoir la loyauté envers la couronne, une citoyenneté robuste et une christianité générique. Armand de Charbonnel, évêque catholique de Toronto, voyait en ce système public une menace envers la population catholique du Haut-Canada. Il encouragea donc les communautés catholiques à supporter un système scolaire distinct. Puisque l'Assemblée législative représentait le Haut ainsi que le Bas-Canada, les Canadiens français majoritairement catholiques du Bas-Canada ont ajouté leur vote à ceux des anglophones modérés du Haut-Canada. Ensemble, ils ont fait passer la loi Taché en 1855. Cela a permis à la minorité catholique du Haut-Canada de créer et gérer ses propres écoles. En 1863, encore une fois avec le support des Canadiens français du Bas-Canada, la loi Scott fut établie. Cette loi, connue aussi sous le nom de la loi sur les écoles séparées, a garanti le droit d'établir des écoles distinctes dans le Haut-Canada et a permis aux écoles catholiques de recevoir une part du Fonds des écoles publiques établi par le gouvernement canadien. En 1867, à l'époque de l'Acte de l'Amérique du Nord britannique, l'archevêque John Joseph Lynch de Toronto initia avec le père de confédération Thomas D'Arcy McGee un procédé sous la section 93 de la loi constitutionnelle. Ensemble, ils ont pu garantir de façon constitutionnelle les droits à l'éducation qu'avaient les minorités religieuses jusqu'à ce temps. Cela a permis aux catholiques de l'Ontario de continuer à avoir leurs propres écoles et d'avoir une part proportionnelle des fonds alloués à l'éducation.
In the course of the 19th century, the Loretto Sisters and the Sisters of St. Joseph, they aligned their curriculum and affiliated with other organizations. The big significance here is that, first of all, young Catholic people could be teachers, and then from there they could be admitted to universities. And for both the men and the women, that gives them the gateway into the professions. I think music, the teaching of music, is one of the great unwritten stories of the history of religious in Ontario. It was revenue generating for the houses. It was also a means of integrating the religious congregations into the community. The various recitals that the sisters gave were open to the entire community, and it was from the entire community, regardless of religious denomination, that their pupils were drawn.
Ainsi fut le début. Pendant des décennies, le système d'écoles séparées de l'Ontario évolua en passant à travers des périodes de grande tourmente grâce au travail généreux de plus de 75 congrégations religieuses enseignantes, de femmes et d'hommes anglophones et francophones. L'effort fut aussi aidé par le travail d'enseignants laïcs recevant que de modestes rémunérations et par des contributions financières reçues de catholiques à travers la province. Durant cette même période, la minorité francophone de l'Ontario se mit à établir un système d'école qui donna accès aux professions.
Au niveau de l'éducation, bien sûr, les premières écoles catholiques francophones en Ontario étaient fondées par des congrégations religieuses, dans des endroits où l'éducation était peu accessible. Des femmes et des hommes religieux partaient de grands centres, de grandes villes, et s'en allaient s'établir à des endroits comme Haileybury ou Chelmsford dans le nord et vers Windsor dans le sud, où c'était plus ou moins accessible. C'était un grand sacrifice pour ces personnes-là qui ont donné leur vie pour l'éducation des enfants. Les communautés religieuses ont aussi eu un grand impact sur l'éducation post-secondaire des élèves. On a ouvert des écoles normales pour former les futurs enseignants, les Sœurs de la Charité en particulier ici à Ottawa. Et puis un collège, les Frères des écoles chrétiennes étaient impliqués dans l'ouverture du collège de la Cité collégiale pour les arts et la technologie, le premier collège francophone en Ontario. La contribution des congrégations religieuses à l'éducation catholique francophone a ouvert un chemin pour des jeunes dans les professions. Combien sont devenus infirmiers et infirmières ou bien enseignants, enseignantes à cause de l'influence et de l'ouverture de religieuses en particulier. Surtout des femmes, dans un monde où les femmes avaient moins accès au marché du travail que l'homme moyen.
En 1984, le gouvernement ontarien apporta un appui total au système d'éducation catholique en étendant son financement aux 11e, 12e et 13e années d'études. Aujourd'hui, au 21e siècle, le système scolaire catholique de l'Ontario dessert plus de 650 000 étudiants anglophones avec 45 000 enseignants et 85 000 étudiants francophones avec 7 300 enseignants. Ce film explorera l'héritage qu'ont légué plus de 75 ordres religieux de femmes et d'hommes envers l'éducation catholique en Ontario. Ainsi, les enseignants laïcs débutant la profession pourront connaître et apprécier cette histoire fondatrice.
Depending on which congregation started schools, you have these charisms, these gifts of the Spirit that were part of the school's richness and the treasure. Our sisters were gifted with the charism of unity and reconciliation. So we couldn't help but gift our students with those spiritual gifts as well. Other sisters would have different spiritual gifts. So, you know, if you look throughout the province, there were lots of congregations, male and female, who would have offered those spiritual gifts to their students as part of the legacy of who they were and how they wanted to assist young people to grow in faith.
I think one of the first and most obvious pieces of the legacy left by religious orders is the infrastructure. because what these religious orders do is they set up not just one school in a community, they'll set up a network of schools that are continually fed by the mother houses, by the provincial houses, with teachers, with curriculum, and with a kind of energy that would have been unanticipated at the time and certainly underestimated now. So when you consider that these religious orders created whole networks of schools which have now essentially transferred to, for the most part, lay secular school boards, we have a network that wouldn't have existed without them. I think the second big thing that they offer is they inspired their students. And so the lay people who eventually take over these schools, particularly in the mid-20th century, oftentimes have been influenced by the various charisms of these religious orders. So, for example, if it's the Grey Sisters of the Immaculate Conception who are focused in Pembroke but who had schools throughout the Ottawa Valley and the Archdiocese of Toronto, their special charism of Margaret Youville, for example, of Hands to the Needy, inspired students to sort of take up that charism as lay teachers within the system. And so it's not surprising then that you scratch one of these lay teachers and they're organizing social justice junkets to the Dominican Republic to work with the Sisters' mission in Consuelo to this day. And again, even though the Sisters may not be teaching, the legacy of Margaret Youville that was embedded in their charism is transferred to the lay teachers that have taken over many of their schools. So there's a physical legacy, but there's also a spiritual legacy that's passed on.
When I joined the Basilians, we had schools, 3 in Toronto, 1 in Sudbury, 1 in Sault Ste. Marie, 1 in Windsor. We had across Canada in different cities. And we were financing them with tuitions. So it was really wonderful when the government finally said, we can help. And we turned all of our schools over except for 1 to the school boards. And the tradition went on. Through the chaplaincies, we often stayed on, especially as chaplains. And the new chaplains coming in, the lay chaplains especially, picked up the emphasis on justice that we always had, and it was really good.
Le père Holmes, un prêtre basilien qui enseigne au niveau secondaire depuis 30 ans, incarne cet esprit de justice sociale. À l'âge de 87 ans, il encourage ses étudiants à se sensibiliser aux enjeux mondiaux, dont les changements climatiques.
You know, I'm really amazed at today's youth. They really are concerned. They're not as church-going as they used to be, but dang, they are concerned about the environment, they're concerned about justice, they're concerned about peace, and they're willing to put their feet out there and to do something. So I'm really proud of them.
I'm going to insert letters. Yeah, okay.
Today we're marching for climate justice, and that's Pope Francis's thing, you know, his whole encyclical on Laudate Si, on eco-justice, is fantastic. And so we're taking him up on that, and today the students are getting ready to go out, and we're going to be part of the Climate Justice March in Toronto. And we're all going to wear blue scarves, which comes out of Afghanistan, looking for a border-free world under one blue sky.
Well, I just think that the more people that are aware of that this is happening, the more that the message can be spread, and I think awareness is another step to like making a difference. So the more people that are aware of it
and seeing that it's not just adults who can go and participate in these things, it's kids and high school students and elementary school students who can all participate.
Because we want, like, for our kids and when we're older, and for ourselves, we want the world to be the way, like, healthy and good and
livable.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
La sensibilisation au changement climatique et l'appel vers une réconciliation avec les Premières Nations sont parmi les nombreuses empreintes qu'ont laissé les efforts de religieux et religieuses attentionnés sur l'éducation catholique d'aujourd'hui. Sur les rives du lac Nipissing, nous rencontrons sœur Priscilla Solomon, une femme Ojibwe et sœur de Saint-Joseph qui réfléchit au sujet des pensionnats autochtones et à la réconciliation.
I know that any religious congregations that were involved in them did not go into those schools with the intention of doing harm. They went with the intention of educating and supporting. Part of the challenge was they're part of their own culture, just as we are part of the culture today. So the mentality at that time was Indigenous people have to be like us. They're not going to make it if they don't do things the way we do them, if they don't see life as we see it. So they bought that, Robert Schreiter calls it a lie, because it's a story that is inaccurate, but it fit for them as a society, and they thought that it was what would fit for Indigenous people.
Ici à Geraldton, à 3 heures de distance au nord-est du lac supérieur, des étudiants provenant en majorité d'écoles catholiques du sud ontarien participent à une cérémonie de purification lors d'un voyage scolaire intitulé le Superior North Study and Leadership Program. Ce programme est conçu pour répondre aux demandes de la Commission de vérité et de réconciliation. Greg Rogers travaille depuis plus de 40 ans comme enseignant et administrateur dans le système scolaire catholique. Il est cofondateur de Adventure Learning Experiences, l'organisme en charge du voyage.
Thinking about the religious orders and the impact they've had on me really, I think, led to this Superior North program. That program in Superior North really came out of, I guess, a consciousness to think about what needs to be done in our own country. It's great that we're going over to other countries of the world, but there are some issues here. Superior North is the furthest Catholic board in Ontario. 86% of their students are Indigenous. The purpose of the program really is to build relationships between the students in the South and the students in the North. They will do some wonderful things in terms of student leadership, in terms of their culture. We'll be doing some hoop dancing. They'll be taking us on medicinal walks through the woods. We'll have a hike through the Palisades, a beautiful part of Ontario, and many other cultural activities. In return, our students will build relationships through leadership programs such as the Catholic Graduate Expectations and also the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. So as we learn more about the issues of the North and so on, we just felt compelled to say, what can we do in our own country to build those relationships?
It's really important for them, young teachers, to recognize that if you're of settler or immigrant origins, you come from a culture that has benefited by colonization and the oppression of colonization, and your benefits come simultaneously with the harm that was done to Indigenous peoples. And you're not to blame for it, but you have a responsibility to correct it. So you need to educate yourselves. You need to learn a history that you never learned in school, that your parents never learned. You need to be open to that history, to face its truth, and to say, what do we need to do now to make things different, to make things right?
I didn't think that it'd be as modern, to be honest, because of what I've heard, like from media, from the textbooks and from classroom. We have this idea of what it is back in Toronto and in our classrooms, but we don't actually know who they are, and so it's nice to know them.
I think it's important that our Indigenous students are able to celebrate their culture and celebrate the traditions that they have been learning. We're revitalizing a culture, we're revitalizing a language, and so being given the gift is to share that with non-Indigenous students non-Indigenous adults is so important in order for us to move on and really come to that reconciliation. And yeah, it's just all about bringing awareness and sensitivity, and I think it's important for Canada's history and for our future.
So in 2003, we began to realize that much of the work that we were doing was basically charity. And instead of, visiting somebody in the hospital and paying attention to them there, we needed to ask ourselves, why are they in the hospital to begin with, Or if they're living in a homeless shelter, why are they living here? What are the situations that caused them to be here? So we had to move from the concept of charity to the concept of justice, and to look at the root causes of the social ills that were affecting people. And so one way to do that was to be part of the UN, we felt. Because we're a global institute, we have connections all over the world. So to be on the global stage and to bring the local to the global and vice versa, was important to us. Well, every year since 2009, we have arranged a workshop at the UN in New York for high school students. So this year there were 3 schools, one Loretto School, Madonna High School, and Bishop Redmond. Combination of boys and girls, all grades, 2 little grade 9s who were the most articulate in the whole bunch. And so we take them and we do workshops in the morning from 9 to 1, and then in the afternoon we do a visit. We went to the Canadian Mission where they were able to ask questions. So the kids got the theory and they got the real life experience. And they came home trying to figure out what they could do in their schools in order to spread the message of what needs to be done and how to do it, And most of them say it was a life-changing experience for them.
Des étudiants de la Commission scolaire catholique de Wellington, ainsi que Terry Donaghy, un enseignant à la retraite, accompagnent les enfants d'un orphelinat situé dans les hauts plateaux du Guatemala lors d'un service du Vendredi Saint.
The Guatemala project started in 1999. It involves every 2 years organizing and leading groups of high school students to serve in a home for orphan and abandoned children in Guatemala, about an hour from Guatemala City.
So when we are in Guatemala, we very quickly establish relationships with the children who are living at the orphanage and the staff who are there. The staff have very specific projects that they assign to us. And so we are engaged in things such as gardening, helping in the kitchen, helping students with their studies. We have been responsible for painting and constructing a new indoor recreation center for the children. So it's a very moving experience, transformative experience for our young people who come with us. And in many ways, they often speak about coming back and having been transformed themselves.
Cette transformation peut parfois mener à ce qu'on pourrait nommer un héritage vivant. Après un voyage scolaire en Inde, Isabelle Ninglai a eu l'idée de mettre sur pied une fondation. Isabelle explique.
So in 2011, I had the opportunity to travel with the Loretto Sisters to Calcutta and Darjeeling in India, specifically in Loretto Panigata, where I was able to teach and work with the students one-on-one. Many of them have gone through such hardships. Their parents work in the tea leaf plantation, are brick builders or stone breakers. But it's really inspiring to see the students come to class, feeling energized and ready to learn, always have a smile on their face. So when myself and my co-founder Miranda Dela Cruz came back from our trip, we really wanted to help out in any way that we could. So we decided to co-found our own not-for-profit organization called One Focus, which every year we focus on a different cause ranging between international and local causes. So for our first year, we decided to take our experiences in India and really bring them into the classroom in the Toronto Catholic District School Board and share with the different students our experience that we had in India. And through fundraisers, workshops, and keynotes, we were able to raise almost $10,000 for Loreto Paniagata.
Ici, au Mary Ward Center, sur le campus du Collège Saint-Michael de Toronto, Anne McGowan, directrice, a organisé une journée Métanoïa. C'est une journée remplie d'ateliers visant le développement spirituel des jeunes provenant d'écoles catholiques du Sud ontarien.
Metanoia seeks to change one's heart and change one's mind. Metanoia provides a chance for young people to really connect with others and understand a little bit more fully about the world we live in and about the injustices that are operative so that they can actually do something about it and make a change in the world and create a more just world. What you're looking at is young people interacting with religious and asking them questions about their lives and about their ministry. Young people are really trying to understand more fully what is it that all these amazing religious have done before them and how are they continuing to live out their own vocation and live out the call to create a more just world. One thing that's so interesting at this time in history is that young people do not have religious in their schools. They're not exposed to the work and the charism of religious congregations. And our aim was to really bridge that gap a little bit and to get young people to understand more fully the work of religious, particularly in Catholic education, but now in their work in the world at large.
I find that it's really important to know how that they are present in our society and how they help us and how they founded many of the schools and institutions that we have.
Ici, à l'école secondaire Paul Desmarais de Stittsville, en banlieue d'Ottawa, Sœur Mona Mreich est aumônier et animatrice de pastorale. Sœur Mona explique son rôle.
Mon travail ici à l'école secondaire, c'est animatrice de pastorale. Donc, c'est vraiment d'aider les élèves à intégrer dans leur vie de tous les jours ce qu'ils apprennent, entre autres, dans leurs cours d'enseignement religieux. Dans leurs cours d'enseignement religieux, ils apprennent beaucoup de notions, c'est très cérébral, mais par la suite, il ne faut pas que ça reste là. Du moins, on ne souhaite pas que ça reste là, parce que ce qu'ils apprennent en enseignement religieux, c'est autre chose que juste dans un cours de géographie ou de mathématiques. On veut qu'ils puissent en vivre, que ça descende à leur cœur, que ce soit, que ça devienne une conviction qu'ils ne sont jamais seuls, que ça devienne quelque chose qui les aide à passer par-dessus les épreuves de leur vie. C'est ça vraiment qu'ils puissent découvrir Dieu présent dans leur vie. Donc je fais ça à travers de plusieurs activités, souvent à travers des jeux, parce que entre 13 et 15 ans, c'est vraiment ce qui les rejoint.
I teach with the Wellington Catholic District School Board, and we run a board program called Terra, and it's for grade 10 students, and they come out here on the property of the Ignatius Jesuit Center to earn 4 credits and essentially experience the land. In the more recent years, we as a culture have become more disconnected from nature. So the Jesuits, they've been very instrumental in reminding us of those vital connections, reminding us that, you know, what we do to each other, we actually do to ourselves. What we do to the earth and which sustains us, we do to ourselves. So that's an incredible lesson for students to be hearing, because that disconnect is growing further today. And so my students are out here on the property to learn that lesson on a daily basis, to take their credits and learn them for the the knowledge and understanding that they have, but more importantly, apply those lessons, that knowledge, to faith, to apply that knowledge to the impact it has on ecology, to apply that knowledge in the way it affects them as being leaders.
L'objet principal du programme de jeunesse du frère François Bergeron est le leadership. Ce programme s'appelle FLICFO.
C'est un acronyme qui veut simplement signifier formation au leadership intégral franco-ontarien. Je dirais que la FLICFO, c'est un élan de leadership qu'on veut transmettre aux jeunes pour que les jeunes de demain se sentent des catholiques, partie prenante de la société et se sentent pleins d'audace et d'assurance pour être capables à leur tour demain de transmettre ces mêmes valeurs à leurs enfants. Au niveau de la FLICFO, bien entendu, avec les élèves qu'on reçoit, on fait des ateliers de formation qui sont théoriques, mais aussi des ateliers de formation qui sont des mises en application. Et notre objectif, c'est que la FLICFO devienne un programme de formation leadership que les jeunes mettent directement en application, soit dans leur milieu scolaire ou soit dans la vie après.
These were highly energetic people, men and women who, despite Hollywood notions of what nuns and priests are supposed to do or what they don't do in the films, these are absolutely energetic people. I can tell students about the time when a Sister of St. Joseph would have to go by canoe in the morning to go to a cabin on the other side of Lake Nipissing to light the fire so that the students would be there in the morning. These are energetic people who are adventurous, who went into the unknown for the most part, particularly those early religious orders coming to Upper Canada, to make a difference. Second thing I would say is that these people had great intelligence. These are not mothers inferior by any stretch of the imagination. They're developing curriculum, they're adapting to new circumstances, new technologies. It's no surprise that in the city of Toronto in the late 19th century, it's the Sisters of St. Joseph who developed one of the first kindergartens based on Froebel's model. The Christian Brothers create one of the first industrial arts programs in their schools. So these are highly creative and intelligent people. The third thing, which will be the hardest for younger teachers coming out now to understand, is sacrifice. These were people who built a system but had to give something up to do it. Oftentimes they donated their salaries back to the school. More often than not, they went into very difficult and trying situations with huge classes in remote areas and taught anyway. These are intelligent young men and women in the 19th and early 20th century that could have ventured into other vocations, particularly the men, but chose not to. They sacrificed that to build a system, sometimes stealing from Peter to pay Paul to make things work. And it's that sacrifice, that intelligence, and that energy, I think, and coming together to build communities across the province that really is something that new students, new teachers should really grasp and be inspired by.
There's a changing face of Canadian Catholicism. It's not the way it was when I was a student, when I was a first-year teacher, even when I retired from teaching back in the year 2000. It's a very hard culture. It's an interesting culture, but these are the ones that are teachers who have to work out of that culture with the kids and with their own stresses, with their own, challenges as they stick-handle their way through life. So to come back to the point, particularly, it's to alert them, to awaken within them, to encourage them to own their own baptism and their role as evangelizers in the church of now, the church of today.
It takes time to grow in a certain sense of self-awareness and how God's at work in that, and how we resist sometimes and there's other things going on. That was something that really captivated me early on when I was joining religious life, and I've noticed that a lot of teachers have also noticed that self-awareness, you know, at the end of the day is so important and valuable. When it comes to doing well at the opportunities we get to bring transformation and to make a difference.
Keep updating yourself. You can't just stay in a rut. You know what you know and you can start off now. But you must continue to update yourself, and there are books, there are CDs, there are DVDs, there's all kinds of opportunity, courses, conventions to attend. Just keep yourself interested in education and keep wanting to learn more about it. And you can give more. You can't give what you haven't got.
And I think that a virtue that really shows that is the virtue of patience. Always to remember to be very patient with your students. There'll be times where you might be sort of frustrated, but always make sure to take a step back, look at the big picture, and really focus in on, you know, what brought you to the classroom and how's the best way to inspire your students.